Now to Cuba, where the island has been struggling to restore electricity after Hurricane Ian knocked out power to the entire island of 11 million people last week. Long blackouts and shortages of food and water have led to a rising tide of anger and growing protests. The hurricane hit Cuba as it was already suffering from one of its worst economic crises since former leader Fidel Castro's 1959 revolution. Our Cuba correspondent Will Grant gives us this report.
The protesters' anger may be over their immediate needs, electricity, water, food, but there can be no mistaking the cry on their lips, libertad, freedom. This latest misery was inflicted on Cuba when Hurricane Ian thundered across the western end of the island, leaving widespread destruction in its wake. Homes and crops in the Pinar del Rio province were ruined, and power was knocked out to more than 1 million people. That strained the rest of the grid, and soon electricity was lost to the entire nation. 11 million Cubans in the dark. Worse still, no power means no water pumped to the taps, and valuable food turning bad inside fridges and freezers. On an island of shortages, people turned desperate. The government, fearing a repeat of the mass demonstrations seen last year, sent out the security forces, both in uniform and in plain clothes, armed with sticks to break up any protests. Many refused to back down. This has nothing to do with politics. I'm not a communist or a capitalist, says this Havana resident. This is our reality, and you can't silence it or hide it. But the Cuban leadership remains unsympathetic to such a viewpoint.
Those who act in this way reclaim all the rights that the revolution gives them, but who contribute little must be argued with and confronted.
Certainly, Hurricane Ian hit Cuba at the worst possible moment. It came shortly after a massive fire at the island's largest fuel depot in Matanzas, which left the facility partly unusable. Socialist ally Venezuela has offered to help rebuild the depot, but it will take months. These twin disasters, the explosions and the storm, have deepened an energy crisis on an island already struggling with blackouts, particularly in small communities like San Antonio de los Baños outside Havana. Without power, it's hard to keep the mosquitoes away, especially from the children, says local resident Ariel. The hospitals are full of patients with dengue, he adds, and that was before the hurricane hit. The energy outlook in Cuba is dire. With food distribution and other basic services also affected, these have been some of the toughest few weeks many Cubans can remember. For the young, perhaps the hardest they've ever known. There may yet, however, be harder ones ahead. Will Grant, BBC News.